The crack of a revolver echoed through the crisp Montana morning as Katherine Rose ran for her life, the hem of her dress catching on sagebrush as she stumbled across the unforgiving terrain. She'd escaped in the night from the gambling hall where her own flesh and blood had sold her like cattle to settle his debts. And now the debt collector's men were hunting her down like a wounded deer. It was 1876, and Twin Falls, Montana, was nothing more than a collection of wooden structures huddled against the vast wilderness, a place where fortunes were made and lost on the turn of a card. And apparently, where a woman's freedom could be bargained away by a desperate brother. Katherine's lungs burned as she pushed herself harder, her long auburn hair falling from its pins as she glanced back at the riders gaining ground behind her. Just 22 years old, she had already endured more heartbreak than most faced in a lifetime. First losing her parents to typhoid 2 years prior, then watching her older brother Thomas spiral into a pit of gambling and whiskey. She never imagined he would sink so low as to use her as payment. "There she is," a gruff voice shouted. "Get her before Blackwater realizes she's gone." The mention of Maxwell Blackwater, the most notorious saloon owner and gambling man in the territory, sent fresh terror through Katherine's veins. He had looked at her with cold calculation the night before, assessing her worth as Thomas pushed forward the deed to her guardianship, a document he had no legal right to create. But that would be enforced in this lawless corner of the frontier. "You'll fetch a fine price at my establishment, Miss Rose," Blackwater had drawled, his eyes lingering on her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Your brother owes me $800. I reckon you'll work that off in about a year, maybe 2, depending on how cooperative you are." Katherine had waited until the small hours of the morning before slipping out a back window, taking nothing but the clothes on her back and a small locket containing a miniature portrait of her parents. But dawn had barely broken before Blackwater's men were on her trail. As the thundering hoofbeats drew closer, Katherine felt her strength failing. The vast open plains offered no shelter, no place to hide. She was going to be caught, dragged back, and forced into a life she couldn't bear to contemplate. A shot rang out, closer this time, kicking up dirt near her feet. Katherine stumbled and fell sprawling face first into the dusty earth. Rolling onto her back, she saw 3 riders bearing down on her, their faces twisted in cruel satisfaction at having run their quarry to ground. But then, from her peripheral vision, Katherine caught sight of a dust cloud approaching from the east, another rider, coming fast. "What in tarnation?" one of Blackwater's men muttered, turning his horse. The newcomer rode like he was born in the saddle, his lean form moving in perfect rhythm with the powerful chestnut stallion beneath him. As he drew closer, Katherine saw a flash of silver as the sun caught the star pinned to his vest. "That's Patrick Bentley," another of her pursuers hissed. "The marshal's deputy." The deputy pulled his horse to a stop between Katherine and her pursuers, his Winchester rifle leveled steadily at the men. "Gentlemen," he called, his voice carrying across the distance with quiet authority, "I suggest you turn around and head back to town." The leader of the group, a scarred man with a patch over one eye, spat on the ground. "This ain't none of your business, Bentley. The girl belongs to Blackwater, fair and square." "A human being can't belong to anyone," Deputy Bentley replied, his tone deceptively casual. "Not in this country." "Not anymore." Katherine watched as the standoff stretched between them, 4 men frozen in a tableau of frontier justice. The deputy was younger than she expected, perhaps 28 or 29, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. A thin scar traced his jawline, disappearing into the shadow of his hat. "Blackwater won't take kindly to this," the one-eyed man warned. "And the federal marshal won't take kindly to hearing about forced servitude," Bentley countered. "So I reckon we've got ourselves a situation." The 3 men exchanged glances. Everyone knew Blackwater's influence in Twin Falls was substantial, but federal law was federal law, and a marshal's deputy carried weight. "This ain't over," the scarred man finally growled, wheeling his horse around. His companions followed suit, casting dark glances back at Katherine and the deputy as they rode away. When they were just specks on the horizon, Deputy Bentley finally lowered his rifle and turned his attention to Katherine. Dismounting in one fluid motion, he approached slowly as one might a frightened animal. "Miss, are you hurt?" he asked, stopping a respectful distance away. Katherine tried to stand, but her legs gave out beneath her. The deputy was at her side in an instant, steady hands helping her up. I'm Katherine Rose," she managed, her throat parched from running and fear. "My brother, he—" The words stuck in her throat, shame burning through her at the thought of explaining her situation. "I know who you are, Miss Rose," the deputy said quietly. "Word travels fast in small towns. I've been looking for you since I heard what Thomas did." His face darkened. What he did was illegal and wrong on every level. Katherine searched his face for any sign of judgment or the calculating look she'd seen in too many men's eyes, but found only steady compassion and something that might have been anger not at her but on her behalf. "They'll come back for me," she whispered. "Not if I have anything to say about it," Deputy Bentley replied, his jaw set in determination. "But we need to get you somewhere safe first." "Can you ride?" Katherine nodded, though the truth was she hadn't been on a horse in years. Before their parents' death, the Rose family had been moderately prosperous ranchers, and Katherine had grown up in the saddle. But Thomas had sold their horses along with most everything else to fund his gambling. The deputy helped her mount his stallion, then swung up behind her. Katherine stiffened at the proximity, unused to being so close to a man. But there was nothing untoward in the way he held the reins on either side of her, creating a secure circle without actually touching her. "I'm taking you to the Mackenzie's place," he explained as they set off at a steady pace. "Martha Mackenzie is a good woman. Her husband Robert runs the general store in town, but they live about 5 miles out. Blackwater's men won't dare cause trouble there. Robert is too well respected and has too many friends." Katherine wanted to ask 100 questions about what would happen next, about her brother, about why this deputy had come looking for her, but exhaustion was quickly overtaking her now that the immediate danger had passed. Before she knew it, her eyes were growing heavy, and she found herself leaning back against the solid warmth of Deputy Bentley's chest. The last thing she remembered before drifting into an exhausted sleep was his voice, low and reassuring near her ear. "You're safe now, Miss Rose, I promise." Katherine woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. She was lying on a soft bed in a small but tidy room, sunlight streaming through lace curtains. Her dress had been replaced by a simple cotton nightgown, and for a moment, panic seized her until she noticed an older woman sitting in a rocking chair by the window, mending in her lap. "There you are, dear," the woman said, setting aside her work. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd sleep the day away entirely." "Where am I?" Katherine asked, her voice raspy. "You're at the Mackenzie homestead, about 5 miles east of Twin Falls." The woman rose and poured water from a pitcher into a glass. "I'm Martha Mackenzie. Deputy Bentley brought you here yesterday morning. You've been sleeping for nearly 24 hours straight." Katherine accepted the water gratefully, memories flooding back as she drank. "The deputy is he?" "Patrick rode back to town after ensuring you were settled," Martha explained. "He needs to sort out this mess with the law. Don't you worry, though. My Robert is with him, and between those two they'll set things right." Katherine's hands trembled around the glass. "My brother sold me to Maxwell Blackwater to clear his gambling debts," she said, the words coming out in a rush. $800, that was my price." Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot with shame and anger. Martha's face softened with compassion as she sat on the edge of the bed. "Oh, child. What your brother did was unconscionable and illegal, no matter what arrangement men like Blackwater think they can make in the territories." She took Katherine's hand in her work-roughened one. "But you have friends now, even if you don't know it yet. Why would the deputy help me?" Katherine asked. "He doesn't even know me." Martha's eyes crinkled at the corners. Patrick Bentley is a good man with a strong sense of justice. When he heard what happened, well, let's just say he takes his oath to uphold the law very seriously. She paused. And I suspect he remembers what it's like to be at the mercy of powerful men who make their own rules. Before Katherine could ask what she meant, the sound of hoofbeats approached the house. Martha rose and peered out the window. "Well, speak of the devil," she said with a smile. "It's Patrick and Robert now. You stay put, dear. I'll tell them you're awake, but you need to rest more before facing questions." Left alone, Katherine took stock of her situation. Her entire life had been upended in the span of 48 hours. She had no home, no possessions beyond the nightgown she now wore, and her own brother had essentially sold her into bondage. Yet somehow, through the intervention of a stranger, she had escaped that fate at least temporarily. Martha returned shortly with a clean dress draped over her arm. "This might be a bit large, but it'll do until we can get your own clothes washed and mended or get you some new ones." Katherine touched the simple blue calico fabric. "I can't accept nonsense," Martha cut her off gently. "It's just a dress. Now, the men would like to speak with you when you're ready. No rush." 20 minutes later, properly dressed with her hair brushed and braided by Martha's efficient hands, Katherine made her way into the Mackenzie's cozy sitting room. Robert Mackenzie, a broad-shouldered man with kind eyes and graying temples, stood as she entered. Beside him, Deputy Patrick Bentley rose as well, removing his hat. "Miss Rose," the deputy greeted her, those storm-gray eyes assessing her with concern. "How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you," she replied, acutely aware of how vulnerable she must appear to these strangers. Drawing herself up to her full height, which wasn't much, she added, "and grateful for your intervention yesterday." Patrick nodded, then gestured to a chair. "Please sit. We need to discuss what happens next." As Katherine settled onto the edge of a well-worn armchair, Martha pressed a cup of tea into her hands. The warmth was comforting against her still trembling fingers. "I've spoken with Marshal Jenkins," Patrick began, "and filed a formal report about what your brother attempted to do. Thomas Rose is currently in the town jail." Katherine's breath caught. "Thomas is in jail?" "Yes, madam," Robert Mackenzie confirmed, his voice gentle but firm. "Selling a person, even a family member, into any form of servitude is illegal under federal law, has been since the 13th Amendment. But what about Mr. Blackwater?" Katherine asked. "He's a powerful man in Twin Falls, from what I gathered." A muscle tightened in Patrick's jaw. "Blackwater claims he was merely accepting your voluntary services as repayment for your brother's debt. Says he had no intention of forcing you to do anything against your will." His tone made it clear what he thought of that claim. "That's a lie," Katherine said, her voice stronger than she expected. "He told me explicitly that I would be working in his establishment, and the way he looked at me." She faltered, unable to describe the predatory gleam in Blackwater's eyes. "We know," Patrick assured her. "But without witnesses beyond your brother, who isn't exactly reliable, it's his word against yours. And in Twin Falls. Blackwater owns half the businesses and has dirt on the other half," Robert finished grimly. Katherine felt the fragile hope that had begun to form crumble away. "So he'll get away with it, and I'll never be safe in Twin Falls." "Not exactly," Patrick said, leaning forward. "Marshal Jenkins is bringing in a federal prosecutor from Helena next week to look into several matters concerning Blackwater's operations. This incident with you might be just what they need to finally build a case against him. In the meantime," Martha interjected, "you'll stay with us, dear. We have plenty of room, and I could use the help around the house." Katherine looked at the older woman in surprise. "You'd take me in?" "A stranger? You wouldn't be the first young woman we've helped," Martha said with a meaningful glance at her husband. "Robert and I believe in lending a hand to those in need. But what about my brother?" Katherine asked, torn between anger at Thomas's betrayal and the instinctive concern of a sister. For all his faults, Thomas was her only family. Patrick's expression hardened slightly. "He'll face charges for his actions." but the prosecutor might be lenient if he cooperates with the investigation against Blackwater. The conversation continued as they discussed practicalities. Katherine would need clothes, personal items, perhaps some work to sustain herself. Robert offered her a position helping at the general store once things settled down. Patrick explained that he would check in regularly to ensure her safety and keep her updated on the case. As dusk fell, Patrick prepared to return to town. Katherine walked him to the porch, wanting a moment to speak privately. "Deputy Bentley," she began. "Patrick, please," he corrected her gently. "Patrick." His name felt strange on her lips. "I don't know how to thank you for what you did. You risked your life for someone you didn't even know." He studied her for a long moment, his face half-shadowed in the fading light. "No decent man could have done otherwise, Miss Rose." "Katherine," she offered in return. A slight smile touched his lips, softening his serious demeanor. "Katherine," he settled his hat on his head. "Rest easy tonight. I'll be back tomorrow to check on you." As she watched him ride away, Katherine felt something unfamiliar stir within her, not quite hope, but perhaps its precursor. For the first time since her parents' death, someone had stood up for her without expecting anything in return. In this harsh frontier where survival often depended on compromise and concession, such genuine kindness was as rare as it was precious. Martha appeared beside her, wrapping a shawl around Katherine's shoulders against the evening chill. "He's a good one, that Patrick Bentley," she said softly. "Hasn't had an easy life himself, but it only made him kinder instead of harder." Katherine thought of the scar on his jaw, the watchful eyes that seemed to have seen too much. "What happened to him?" she asked before she could stop herself. Martha hesitated. "That's his story to tell if he chooses, but I will say this: he understands what it means to be betrayed by those who should protect you." She squeezed Katherine's shoulder. "Come inside now, dear. Tomorrow's another day." That night, as Katherine lay in the unfamiliar bed, she tried to make sense of all that had happened. 2 days ago, she had been Thomas's dutiful sister, managing their meager household while he squandered what little they had. Now she was alone, yet paradoxically less alone than she'd felt in years. The Mackenzies had welcomed her without question, and Deputy Patrick Bentley had risked his position, perhaps his life, to rescue her. Katherine didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of something that might, with care and time, grow into trust. The next morning, Katherine woke to the scent of coffee and baking bread. For a disorienting moment, she imagined she was back in her childhood home, her mother preparing breakfast in the kitchen below. Reality returned swiftly, bringing with it the memory of her current circumstances, but surprisingly not the wave of despair she had expected. She dressed in another borrowed dress from Martha, this one a soft brown that complemented her auburn hair, and made her way downstairs. The Mackenzie kitchen was warm and inviting, with copper pots hanging from hooks and herbs drying from the ceiling beams. "Good morning, dear," Martha greeted her. "Sleep well." "Better than I expected," Katherine admitted, accepting a cup of coffee. "Robert's already gone to town to open the store," Martha explained. "I thought you and I might spend the day getting you settled properly. There's a trunk of fabric in the spare room. We could start on making you a few dresses of your own." Katherine's throat tightened at the kindness. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Martha waved away her concern. "Family doesn't keep ledgers, dear." "But I'm not. You are now," Martha said firmly. "At least until you decide otherwise." They spent the morning measuring and cutting fabric, Martha teaching Katherine the finer points of dressmaking that her own mother hadn't had time to show her before her death. By midday, they had the makings of a practical everyday dress well underway. As they worked, Martha shared stories of Twin Falls and its inhabitants, who could be trusted, who couldn't, the history of the settlement since its founding 15 years earlier during the Montana Gold Rush. Katherine listened, absorbing the information like parched earth takes water, knowing that understanding this new world was crucial to her survival in it. "And Patrick," Katherine finally ventured to ask. How long has he been deputy? Martha smiled knowingly. About 3 years. He came to us from Wyoming Territory. Was a ranch hand before that, I believe. She threaded a needle with practiced ease. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's earned folks' respect. Fair-minded, doesn't throw his weight around like some lawmen do. Before Katherine could inquire further, the sound of an approaching wagon reached them. Martha peered out the window. "Well, speak of the devil," she said for the second time in as many days. "It's Patrick, and it looks like he's brought your things." Katherine followed her outside to where Patrick was already unloading a small trunk from his wagon. He nodded in greeting, his expression serious as always. "Miss Rose. Mrs. Mackenzie." He set the trunk down. "I took the liberty of collecting your possessions from your brother's house, Katherine. I hope you don't mind." "No, that's. Thank you." Katherine was touched by the thoughtfulness. "How did you manage it?" A shadow crossed his face. "Your brother gave me the key. He wanted me to tell you he's sorry for what it's worth." Katherine felt the familiar mix of anger and sorrow that Thomas always evoked in her these days. "Is he still in jail?" Patrick nodded. "For now. The prosecutor arrives tomorrow. Your brother's cooperating, telling everything he knows about Blackwater's operations." He hesitated. "He asked to see you." Katherine stiffened. "I don't think I can face him yet." "You don't have to," Patrick assured her quickly. "That's entirely your decision." Martha, sensing Katherine's discomfort, changed the subject. "You'll stay for lunch, won't you, Patrick?" "I've made enough stew for an army." Something about the deputy's demeanor caught Katherine's attention, a tightness around his eyes, a certain watchfulness as he scanned the surrounding landscape. "What is it?" she asked. "Something's wrong." Patrick exchanged a glance with Martha before answering. "Blackwater's not happy about the federal prosecutor coming to town. He's been making threats, subtle ones, but threats nonetheless." "Against me?" Katherine asked, her stomach knotting with fear. "Against anyone challenging his authority," Patrick clarified. "But yes, your testimony could be damaging to him. I don't want to alarm you, but I think it's best if you stay close to the house for now." Martha laid a protective hand on Katherine's arm. "No one will harm her here, Patrick. Robert and I will see to that." Patrick nodded, but Katherine could see he wasn't entirely reassured. "I'll be checking in regularly, and I've asked a few reliable men to keep an eye on the property, just in case." The gravity of her situation hit Katherine anew. She wasn't just a woman without a home, she was now a potential witness against one of the most powerful men in the territory. A man who had already shown he didn't view women as anything more than property to be bought and sold. As they moved inside for lunch, Patrick subtly positioned himself so he could see out the window to the approach to the house. The meal was filled with Martha's attempts at pleasant conversation, but the undercurrent of tension remained. When Patrick prepared to leave, Katherine walked him to his wagon. "Tell me honestly," she said, keeping her voice low so Martha wouldn't overhear from the porch. "How much danger am I in?" Patrick's gray eyes met hers directly. "I won't lie to you, Katherine. Blackwater is dangerous when cornered. But," he added, his voice taking on a fierce quality, "I won't let him hurt you, neither will the Mackenzies. You have people on your side now." "Why?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Why are you all helping me? You don't even know me." Patrick was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting to the distant mountains. "When I was 16, he said finally, "my father lost our ranch in a card game to a man like Blackwater. When he couldn't pay, they beat him so badly he never walked right again. My mother took ill from the stress and died that winter." His jaw tightened at the memory. "The law did nothing, said it was a private dispute between gentlemen." He looked back at Katherine, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "So I became the law. To make sure what happened to my family doesn't happen to others. That's why I'm helping you, Katherine, because no one helped us." Katherine was stunned by the personal revelation from this normally reserved man. "I'm sorry about your parents," she said softly. "It was a long time ago," he replied, though his eyes said otherwise. He climbed onto the wagon seat. "I'll be back tomorrow, try not to worry." As Katherine watched him drive away, She felt a new connection forming a thread of understanding between two people who had both lost nearly everything to the greed and cruelty of others. For the first time since her parents' death, she didn't feel completely alone in her grief. That night, long after Martha and Robert had retired, Katherine sat by the window of her room, gazing out at the moon-washed landscape. The vast Montana territory stretched before her, beautiful and terrible in its wildness. Somewhere out there, Maxwell Blackwater was plotting his next move. Somewhere, her brother sat in a jail cell, perhaps finally reckoning with the consequences of his actions. And somewhere between Twin Falls and this sanctuary, Patrick Bentley was standing guard against the darkness, upholding the law in a place where men often made their own rules. Katherine touched the glass, cool beneath her fingertips. She had lost her home, her family, and nearly her freedom in the span of a few days. But perhaps, just perhaps, she had found something else, something that might, in time, heal the wounds of betrayal. The next week passed in a blur of activity. Katherine settled into life at the Mackenzie homestead, helping Martha with household chores and learning to bake bread that didn't emerge from the oven hard as stone. Robert taught her the basics of bookkeeping for the store, suggesting she might help with the accounts once the situation with Blackwater was resolved. Patrick visited every other day, bringing news from town. The federal prosecutor, a stern man named Judge Callahan, had arrived and was taking testimonies. Thomas had told everything he knew about Blackwater's operation, the rigged card games, the loan sharking, the whiskey smuggling, and yes, the attempted sale of his sister to clear his debts. "What will happen to Thomas?" Katherine asked Patrick during one of his visits, as they walked along the creek that ran behind the Mackenzie property. "He'll face charges," Patrick replied, "but likely a reduced sentence for his cooperation." Judge Callahan seems inclined to view him as another of Blackwater's victims, to some extent. Katherine sighed, picking up a flat stone and skipping it across the water as her father had taught her long ago. He is a victim in a way. Weak-willed and foolish, but Blackwater knew exactly how to exploit that. Patrick watched her with something like admiration as the stone bounced 4 times before sinking. "You're remarkably forgiving considering what he tried to do." "Not forgiving," Katherine corrected, "just understanding. Thomas has been lost since our parents died. He turned to gambling and whiskey instead of facing his grief." She selected another stone. "That doesn't excuse what he did, but I can see how it happened." Patrick was quiet for a moment. "Judge Callahan wants you to testify," he finally said. "About what Blackwater said to you that night." The stone slipped from Katherine's fingers, plopping unceremoniously into the creek. "Testify in front of everyone, in front of Blackwater," Patrick nodded grimly. "I told him it was asking too much, but he insists your first-hand account is crucial." Katherine wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm spring day. "When? 2 days from now, in the courthouse in Twin Falls." Katherine closed her eyes, trying to master the fear rising within her. The thought of facing Blackwater again, of feeling his cold gaze on her while she recounted that humiliating night, it was almost unbearable. "I'll be there with you," Patrick said softly. "Every minute. He won't be able to get near you." Katherine opened her eyes to find Patrick watching her with such intensity that it momentarily drove away her fear. In that moment, she realized he would indeed protect her, not just because it was his duty, but because he genuinely cared what happened to her. "All right," she said, drawing a deep breath. "I'll do it. For all the other women he might try to exploit if he's not stopped." Patrick's expression softened with respect and something else Katherine couldn't quite identify. "You're braver than you give yourself credit for, Katherine Rose." The walk back to the house was quiet, but comfortably so. Katherine found herself acutely aware of Patrick's presence, beside her the steady rhythm of his breathing, the way he instinctively positioned himself between her and the denser woods where a threat might lurk, the occasional brush of his arm against hers that sent an unexpected warmth through her body. When they reached the house, Martha called them in for supper. The meal was lively, with Robert recounting the latest town gossip he'd heard at the store. Katherine laughed at his colorful descriptions of Twin Falls' more eccentric citizens, momentarily forgetting her anxiety about the upcoming testimony. As Patrick prepared to leave, Katherine found herself reluctant to see him go. These visits had become the highlight of her days, a fact she wasn't quite ready to examine too closely. "Will you come tomorrow?" she asked, then immediately felt foolish for the eagerness in her voice. A rare smile curved Patrick's lips, transforming his serious face. "I'll be by in the afternoon. We should go over what to expect at the hearing." He hesitated, then added, "And maybe you can teach me that stone skipping trick. Never could get more than 2 bounces myself." Katherine returned his smile, pleased at the idea of teaching this capable man something he didn't know. "It's all in the wrist," she told him. "I'll show you." After he departed, Martha gave Katherine a knowing look that made her blush to the roots of her hair. "He's a good man," the older woman said simply. "And it's about time he found someone who makes him smile like that." He's just doing his job," Katherine stammered. Martha's only response was a skeptical raised eyebrow before she turned back to her mending. That night, Katherine dreamed of Blackwater's cold eyes and her brother's desperate face as he signed the document that would have sold her into servitude. But in the dream, when she ran from Blackwater's men, it wasn't just Patrick who came to her rescue, it was Patrick and herself together, standing side by side, neither backing down. She woke feeling stronger than she had in months, perhaps years. Whatever came next, she would face it with the courage Patrick believed she possessed. The day of the hearing dawned clear and bright. Katherine dressed carefully in a new dress she and Martha had finished just the previous day, a deep green calico that brought out the amber flecks in her hazel eyes. Martha helped her arrange her hair in a simple but elegant style, pinned up to reveal the graceful line of her neck. "You look lovely, dear," Martha assured her. "Strong and dignified, exactly how you want to appear before the judge." Katherine's hands trembled slightly as she fastened her mother's locket around her neck. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Of course you are," Martha said matter-of-factly. "Only a fool wouldn't be, but you'll do fine. And remember, Robert and I will be there along with Patrick." When Patrick arrived to escort them to town, his eyes widened slightly at the sight of Katherine, and a flush of color appeared high on his cheekbones. "You look." He cleared his throat. "That is, you'll make a very good impression on the judge." The ride to Twin Falls was tense, with Patrick repeatedly scanning their surroundings for any sign of trouble. "Blackwater's been unusually quiet," he explained. "That worries me more than if he were making overt threats." The town of Twin Falls had grown substantially since the gold rush days, with several streets of permanent buildings extending outward from the original mining camp. The courthouse stood at the center of town, a 2-story structure of locally quarried stone that represented the territory's aspiration toward civilization and order. As they approached, Katherine could see a crowd gathered on the courthouse steps. Her heart began to race, and she instinctively moved closer to Patrick. "It's all right," he murmured, his hand briefly covering hers where it rested on the wagon seat. "I won't leave your side." Inside, the courtroom was packed with townspeople curious about the proceedings against the notorious Maxwell Blackwater. Katherine felt dozens of eyes on her as Patrick escorted her to a seat near the front, the Mackenzies following close behind. Judge Callahan was indeed a stern-looking man with piercing blue eyes and a neatly trimmed white beard. He called the court to order with a sharp rap of his gavel. "The United States of America versus Maxwell Blackwater," he announced. Charges include illegal gambling operations, tax evasion, smuggling untaxed liquor across territorial lines, loan sharking, extortion, and attempted human trafficking. A murmur ran through the crowd at the final charge. Katherine kept her eyes forward, refusing to look to where Blackwater sat with his lawyer. "Call your first witness, Mr. Prosecutor," Judge Callahan instructed. To Katherine's surprise, Thomas was brought in first. Her brother looked pale and thin in his jail clothes, his once handsome face haggard with stress and shame. He couldn't meet her eyes as he took the stand and swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor led Thomas through his testimony, his gambling debts to Blackwater, the increasing pressure as the interest mounted, and finally, the terrible night when Blackwater had suggested an alternative form of payment. He said he'd cancel my debt if I signed over guardianship of my sister, Thomas explained, his voice barely audible. Said she was marketable and would earn back his money quickly in his establishment. And you agreed to this arrangement? The prosecutor asked. Thomas hung his head. God help me, I did. I was drunk and desperate and afraid he'd kill me if I didn't pay. And did Mr. Blackwater specify what services your sister would be performing at his establishment? Not in so many words, Thomas replied, but his meaning was clear enough. His place isn't just a saloon, there are rooms upstairs where women entertain men for money. The crowd's murmuring grew louder. Judge Callahan banged his gavel. Order in the court. Katherine sat rigid through the testimony, Patrick's solid presence beside her the only thing keeping her from fleeing the humiliating scene. When Thomas was escorted back to his seat, he finally looked at her, his eyes pleading for a forgiveness she wasn't yet ready to give. The court calls Katherine Rose, the prosecutor announced. Patrick squeezed her hand once before she rose on unsteady legs. The walk to the witness stand seemed to take an eternity, the floorboards creaking beneath her feet in the hushed courtroom. After being sworn in, she finally allowed herself to look at Maxwell Blackwater. He was watching her with the same cold, assessing gaze she remembered, as if calculating her worth even now. But something else flickered in his eyes when they met hers, a momentary unease, quickly masked. He hadn't expected her to meet his gaze directly, she realized. He had expected a cowering victim. Drawing strength from that small victory, Katherine straightened her shoulders and began her testimony. She recounted that terrible night in clear, steady tones, Blackwater's examination of her as if she were livestock, his explicit statement about how long it would take her to work off her brother's debt, his threats when she protested. He told me I could do things the easy way or the hard way, she said, but either way I belong to him now and I'd better get used to it. And did you consent to this arrangement, Miss Rose? The prosecutor asked. I did not, Katherine replied firmly. I told him I was a free woman and not my brother's property to sell. That's when he... She faltered briefly. Take your time, Miss Rose, Judge Callahan encouraged. Katherine drew a deep breath. That's when he grabbed my arm and told me that women like me, by which he meant women without money or powerful family connections, were only free until someone decided otherwise. He said that in Twin Falls he decided. The prosecutor nodded solemnly. And what happened next? He had his men lock me in a room above the saloon, said I could start my new employment the next day, but I escaped through the window that night and ran. And his men pursued you? Yes, on horseback. They would have caught me if Deputy Bentley hadn't intervened. As she recounted Patrick's arrival and her rescue, Katherine couldn't help glancing to where he sat, his eyes never leaving her face. The unwavering support in his gaze gave her the courage to finish her testimony without faltering. The cross-examination by Blackwater's lawyer was brutal. He insinuated that Katherine had willingly agreed to work for Blackwater to help her brother, then changed her mind and invented the more lurid details. He suggested that her running away was merely an attempt to renege on a legitimate business arrangement. He even implied that she and Thomas had conspired to entrap Blackwater in a false accusation. Throughout it all, Katherine maintained her composure, never raising her voice or showing the anger that boiled within her at these accusations. She simply repeated the truth, looking directly at Judge Callahan as she spoke. When she was finally allowed to step down, her legs felt like water, and she was grateful for Patrick's steadying hand as she returned to her seat. Martha pressed a handkerchief into her palm, and only then did Katherine realize there were tears on her cheeks. Several more witnesses were called townspeople who had witnessed Blackwater's other illegal activities. A young man who had lost his family's farm to Blackwater's loan sharking operation. And finally, one of Blackwater's own men who had turned state's evidence in exchange for leniency. By the time Judge Callahan called a recess to consider the evidence, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows through the courthouse windows. Katherine was exhausted, drained by the emotional ordeal of testifying and then enduring the defense's attacks on her character. "You did wonderfully," Patrick told her as they stepped outside for some fresh air. "Judge Callahan was clearly moved by your testimony. I could see it in his face." "Will it be enough?" Katherine asked. Patrick's expression darkened. "It should be, but Blackwater has money and connections. Even federal judges aren't always immune to influence." The crowd around the courthouse had grown as word spread about the sensational testimony. Katherine felt eyes on her, some sympathetic, others merely curious, and a few openly hostile. Blackwater had friends in Twin Falls, people who benefited from his operations or feared his retribution. As they stood on the courthouse steps, Katherine noticed a group of rough-looking men gathered across the street, watching them intently. Patrick followed her gaze and immediately stepped closer to her, his hand moving to rest on the revolver at his hip. "Blackwater's men," he murmured. "They won't try anything here in the open, but be ready to move quickly if I say so." The tension was broken by the courthouse doors opening behind them as the bailiff called everyone back inside. Judge Callahan had reached his decision. The courtroom fell silent as the judge took his seat. He surveyed the room for a long moment before speaking. "This court has heard substantial evidence of criminal activity by the defendant, Maxwell Blackwater," he began. "While some charges require further investigation, the testimony regarding the attempted trafficking of Miss Katherine Rose is both compelling and disturbing." Katherine held her breath as the judge continued. "Such behavior represents a grave threat to the very fabric of civilized society. If citizens cannot trust that the law protects their basic freedoms, particularly women and others, who have traditionally been vulnerable to exploitation, then we cannot claim to be a nation of laws." Judge Callahan's gaze fixed on Blackwater. "I find sufficient evidence to hold the defendant for trial on all counts. Bail is denied due to the serious nature of the charges and the defendant's substantial resources, which present a flight risk." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. No one had expected Blackwater to be denied bail. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I am ordering the immediate closure of Mr. Blackwater's gambling establishment pending the outcome of the trial and the freezing of his known assets." Blackwater leapt to his feet, his face contorted with rage. "You can't do this." "Do you know who I am in this town?" "Sit down, Mr. Blackwater," the judge ordered sharply. "One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt." As the bailiffs moved to take Blackwater into custody, he turned and locked eyes with Katherine. "This isn't over," he hissed, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Not by a long shot." Patrick was immediately on his feet, positioning himself between Katherine and Blackwater's venomous glare. "That's enough," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "One more threat and you'll have additional charges to face." As Blackwater was led away in handcuffs, a stunned silence fell over the courtroom, followed by an eruption of excited chatter. No one had ever seen Maxwell Blackwater humbled before, much less led away like a common criminal. Katherine sat in shocked disbelief. It had worked. Her testimony had helped bring Blackwater to justice. She felt a wave of emotion wash over her: relief, vindication, and a newfound sense of her own strength. Patrick turned to her, his usually serious face transformed by a broad smile. "You did it, Katherine. You stood up to him and the judge believed you." Before she knew what was happening, Katherine found herself enveloped in Patrick's embrace, her face pressed against the solid warmth of his chest as he held her close. For a moment, the courtroom and its occupants faded away, and there was only the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. The clean scent of soap and leather that clung to his clothes, the surprising gentleness of his strong arms around her. When they separated, both slightly flushed at the public display, Martha was beaming at them while Robert pretended not to notice, suddenly very interested in his hat brim. The aftermath of the hearing was a whirlwind. Judge Callahan thanked Katherine personally for her courage in testifying. The prosecutor indicated that Thomas would likely receive a suspended sentence due to his cooperation. Several townspeople approached to express their support, some admitting they too had suffered under Blackwater's predatory practices, but had been too afraid to speak out. As they prepared to leave the courthouse, Patrick drew Katherine aside. "Blackwater's men are still out there," he warned in a low voice, "and they'll be angry. I don't think you should return to the Mackenzie's place tonight. Where should I go?" Katherine asked, suddenly fearful again despite the day's victory. "The marshal has offered his home in town," Patrick explained. "It's well protected and no one would dare attack the marshal's residence. And Thomas. He'll be released tomorrow, but the judge has ordered him to leave the territory as part of his suspended sentence. He'll be put on the eastbound stage." Katherine nodded, a mixture of sadness and relief washing over her. Perhaps it was best for both of them if Thomas made a fresh start somewhere far from the temptations and painful memories of Twin Falls. The Mackenzies insisted on staying in town as well, taking rooms at the hotel near the marshal's house. As darkness fell over Twin Falls, Katherine found herself seated in Marshal Jenkins' parlor, a cup of tea cooling in her hands as she tried to process the events of the day. Patrick had gone to check the perimeter of the property, his concern for her safety evident in every tense line of his body as he'd left. Marshal Jenkins, a gruff but kindly older man, had retired to his study, giving Katherine some much-needed solitude. When Patrick returned, he found her still sitting in the same spot, lost in thought. "All quiet outside," he reported, removing his hat. "Mrs. Jenkins left some supper warming on the stove if you're hungry." Katherine shook her head. "I couldn't eat a bite. Everything feels unreal. Like it's happening to someone else." Patrick sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him but not so close as to be improper. "That's natural after what you've been through. It will take time to feel normal again." "Normal," Katherine repeated with a hollow laugh. "I'm not sure I remember what that is. Even before all this with Blackwater, nothing has been normal since my parents died." Patrick was quiet for a moment. "I understand that," he finally said. "After losing my parents, it was like the world shifted on its axis. Nothing looked or felt the same." "How did you survive it?" Katherine asked, genuinely wanting to know. "One day at a time," he answered simply. "I found purpose in becoming a lawman, in making sure others didn't suffer as my family did." His gray eyes met hers. "And you'll find your way too, Katherine. You're stronger than you know." Something in his gaze made her breath catch an admiration and warmth that went beyond the concern of an officer for a citizen under his protection. Without thinking, she reached out and laid her hand over his where it rested on the sofa between them. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for saving me that day, but for believing in me, for seeing strength in me when I couldn't see it myself." Patrick's hand turned beneath hers, their fingers intertwining in a gesture more intimate than any embrace. "I only saw what was already there," he replied, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Katherine was acutely aware of his proximity, of the way the lamplight caught the auburn highlights in his dark hair, of the small scar along his jaw that she now found herself wanting to trace with her fingertips. The spell was broken by the sound of Marshal Jenkins clearing his throat in the doorway. They pulled apart quickly, Katherine feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "Sorry to interrupt," the marshal said, though the twinkle in his eye suggested he wasn't sorry at all. "Just wanted to let you know I'll be turning in. Patrick, you're welcome to use the spare room, or if you prefer to stand guard, I'll keep watch," Patrick replied, rising to his feet, "at least for the first part of the night." Katherine felt a pang of disappointment at the sudden distance between them, but she understood the necessity. Blackwater's threat still hung in the air, and while he might be behind bars, his loyal men were not. "Good night, then," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "And thank you both for your protection." As she climbed the stairs to the guest room the marshal had prepared for her, Katherine's mind whirled with conflicting emotions. The danger wasn't past, she knew that. But something else had begun, something she hadn't expected or sought, but that now seemed as inevitable as the sunrise. For the first time since her parents' deaths, Katherine Rose was thinking about more than just survival. She was thinking about possibilities. Dawn broke over Twin Falls with a quiet beauty, golden light spilling across the distant mountains and into the streets of the awakening town. Katherine, who had slept fitfully despite her exhaustion, was already dressed and at the window when the first rays of sun touched the marshal's garden. The world looked different this morning, still dangerous, still uncertain, but somehow full of promise in a way it hadn't been before. She found herself wondering what it would be like to start fresh here, to build something new from the ashes of her old life. A soft knock at the door interrupted her reverie. "Katherine, are you awake?" Patrick's voice, pitched low to avoid disturbing the household. She opened the door to find him looking tired but alert, his hair slightly rumpled from a night spent keeping watch. The sight of him sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. "Good morning," she said, suddenly shy in the wake of last night's near intimacy. "Morning." His eyes searched her face. "Sleep well?" "Well enough. Any trouble during the night?" Patrick shook his head. "All quiet. But I'd feel better if you stayed in town for a few more days, just until we're certain Blackwater's men aren't planning any retaliation." The Mackenzies joined them for breakfast, Martha fussing over Katherine like a mother hen. "You look pale, dear. Didn't you sleep?" "It's been an eventful few days," Katherine replied with a small smile. "I'll be fine." Their meal was interrupted by the arrival of a telegram for Patrick. He read it quickly, his expression darkening. "What is it?" Marshal Jenkins asked. "Federal Marshal Wilson will be here by week's end to transport Blackwater to Helena for trial," Patrick explained. "He wants us to maintain extra security until then." The older marshal nodded grimly. "Blackwater will be pulling every string he can reach, trying to avoid that trial." "Can I see Thomas before he leaves?" Katherine asked suddenly. Despite everything, she couldn't let her only brother leave without saying goodbye. Patrick hesitated. "The stage departs at noon. I could escort you to the jail now if you wish." An hour later, Katherine stood outside Thomas's cell, Patrick a respectful distance away to give them privacy, but still within sight. Her brother looked like a shadow of his former self, thin, pale, his once charming smile replaced by a haunted look that aged him beyond his 26 years. "Katie," he said, using the childhood nickname she hadn't heard in years. "I didn't think you'd come." Katherine gripped the iron bars separating them, her feelings too complex for simple expression. "I almost didn't," she admitted. "What you did, Thomas. I don't know if I can ever fully forgive it." Thomas hung his head. "I don't expect forgiveness, I don't deserve it, but I need you to know how sorry I am, not just because I got caught, but because—" His voice broke. "Because I betrayed you in the worst possible way. After everything you did for me after Mother and Father died, taking care of the house, stretching every penny I repaid you by trying to sell you like cattle." Tears stung Katherine's eyes. "Why, Thomas? Was the gambling debt really worth more than your own sister?" "No," he said immediately. "Nothing is worth that, but I was so deep in the hole and Blackwater had threatened to kill me if I didn't pay. I was drunk and terrified and, God help me, I convinced myself it wouldn't be so bad, that you'd work as a barmaid or something." He met her eyes, his own red-rimmed. "But I knew. Deep down, I knew exactly what he intended." Katherine felt the anger that had sustained her begin to drain away, leaving only a profound sadness in its wake. This broken man was still her brother, still the boy who had taught her to skip stones and climb trees, who had once been her protector before grief and whiskey destroyed him. "Where will you go?" she asked. Denver, I think. I have a cousin there who works for the railroad. He's offered me a job before. Thomas gripped the bars, his knuckles white. I'll make this right somehow, Katie. I'll send money when I can. I'll become the kind of man our father would have been proud of, I swear it. Katherine wasn't sure she believed him. Thomas had made many promises over the years, but she saw the genuine remorse in his eyes and something else, a determination she hadn't seen since before their parents' deaths. I hope you do, she said softly. For your own sake, not mine, I'll be all right. Thomas's gaze shifted to where Patrick stood, then back to Katherine. The deputy, he cares for you. I can see it in the way he looks at you. Katherine felt warmth rise to her cheeks. He saved me, that's all. No, Thomas said with the ghost of his old smile. It's more than that. And I'm glad, Katie, glad someone worthy is looking out for you now. When it came time to say goodbye, Katherine surprised herself by reaching through the bars to embrace her brother awkwardly. Be well, Thomas, she whispered, and be better. As they left the jail, Katherine was quiet, processing the complex emotions the meeting had stirred. Patrick didn't press her to talk, offering his steady presence as comfort enough. By the time they reached the marshal's house, she had made a decision. I want to stay in Twin Falls, she announced to the Mackenzies over lunch. Not just until Blackwater is gone, but permanently. Martha beamed. We were hoping you'd say that, dear. The spare room is yours for as long as you want it. That's very generous, Katherine said, but I need to support myself. Robert, you mentioned needing help at the store, the storekeeper nodded. Indeed I do. With the town growing, it's getting to be too much for me alone. The position is yours if you want it, with fair wages. Katherine smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. Then it's settled. Once Blackwater is safely gone, I'll start fresh here. Patrick, who had been surprisingly quiet during this exchange, finally spoke. You're sure this is what you want? Twin Falls holds some difficult memories for you. It also holds some good ones, Katherine replied, her eyes meeting his, and I think it's time I started making more of those. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Katherine helped Martha around the house, spent time with Robert learning the basics of the general store's operations, and began to feel like part of the community as townspeople stopped by to express their support for her stance against Blackwater. Patrick was a constant presence, escorting her when she needed to leave the marshal's house, bringing news from around town, and gradually sharing more of himself in the quiet evenings when they would sit on the porch after supper. Katherine learned about his years working cattle in Wyoming, his decision to become a lawman after moving to Montana, his dreams of someday having a small ranch of his own. In turn, she told him about her childhood on her parents' farm, her love of books and learning, her secret hope of perhaps someday becoming a teacher if Twin Falls ever built a proper school. These conversations, casual on the surface, wove an ever-strengthening bond between them, a friendship deepening into something more with each passing day. On the evening before Federal Marshal Wilson was due to arrive, Patrick found Katherine alone on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in hues of gold and purple. Beautiful, isn't it? He said, settling into the chair beside her. Breathtaking, she agreed. I never appreciated the landscape here before. I was too busy just trying to keep Thomas and myself fed and housed. Patrick was quiet for a moment. Tomorrow, everything changes, he said finally. Once Blackwater is gone, you'll be safe, free to build that new life you were talking about. Something in his tone made Katherine turn to look at him. You make that sound like a goodbye, Deputy Bentley. A ghost of a smile touched his lips at her formal address. Not a goodbye, just... He hesitated, searching for words. I've been thinking about what happens next. About my role in your life once you're no longer in danger. Katherine's heart quickened. And what conclusions have you reached? Patrick shifted in his seat, uncharacteristically nervous. That depends entirely on you, Katherine. He met her eyes directly. These past weeks, getting to know you. It's been the most meaningful time of my life since I lost my parents. Your courage, your resilience, your kindness despite everything you've endured, he broke off, seeming frustrated with his own eloquence. "Patrick," Katherine said softly, encouraging him to continue. He took a deep breath. "What I'm trying to say, very badly, is that I care for you. More than as someone under my protection. More than as a friend, even." His gray eyes held hers, vulnerability and strength mingled in their depths. "And if you could see your way clear to letting me court you properly once all this is over, it would make me the happiest man in the territory." The directness of his declaration took Katherine's breath away. After Thomas's betrayal, after Blackwater's attempt to buy and sell her, she had thought herself incapable of trusting a man again, any man. Yet here was Patrick, offering not demands or expectations, but simply his heart, with no strings attached. "I don't have much to offer," he continued when she didn't immediately respond. "A deputy's pay isn't grand, though I've saved most of it, but I promise you this: I would spend every day making sure you never regretted giving me a chance." Katherine reached out and took his hand, marveling at how natural it felt to do so. "Patrick Bentley," she said, her voice steadier than she expected, "I would be honored to be courted by you." The transformation of his face in that moment was something Katherine knew she would remember all her life, the way hope and joy broke through his habitual reserve, like sunrise through storm clouds, the way his entire being seemed to light up from within. Before either of them could say more, the sound of approaching horses interrupted the moment. Patrick was on his feet instantly, hand moving to his revolver as he positioned himself in front of Katherine. Marshal Jenkins appeared in the doorway behind them. "Riders coming," he said grimly. "Multiple horses moving fast." Patrick's expression hardened. "Get inside, Katherine, now." She obeyed without question, hurrying into the house as the two lawmen took up defensive positions on the porch. Through the window, Katherine watched as a group of riders thundered into view, not Blackwater's men as she had feared, but a detachment of U.S. Marshals led by a grim-faced man she assumed was Marshal Wilson. The lead marshal dismounted quickly, striding toward the house with urgency in every step. "Jenkins, Bentley," he called, "we've got trouble." Patrick met him halfway across the yard. "What's happened?" "Jailbreak," Wilson replied, loud enough for Katherine to hear through the partially open window. "Blackwater's gone. 3 men hit the jail an hour ago, killed the night deputy and busted him out." Katherine's blood ran cold. Blackwater was free and undoubtedly seeking revenge against those who had testified against him, with her at the top of the list. The next hour was a flurry of activity as a defensive perimeter was established around the marshal's house. Extra men were dispatched to guard the Mackenzies and other key witnesses. Plans were made to evacuate Katherine to Helena until Blackwater was recaptured. "I don't want to run," she protested when Patrick explained the plan. "This is my home now, I won't be chased away." "It's not running, it's being smart," Patrick argued, his face taut with worry. "Blackwater is desperate and dangerous. He has nothing left to lose." "He's right, Miss Rose," Marshal Wilson agreed. "Blackwater specifically threatened you in court. We have to assume you're his primary target." Katherine wanted to argue further, but the fear in Patrick's eyes stopped her. This wasn't just about her safety, it was about his peace of mind as well. "All right," she conceded, "but only until he's captured." The plan was set. Katherine would leave at first light, escorted by 2 marshals to the railhead at Butte, then on to Helena, where she would stay under federal protection. Patrick would remain in Twin Falls, leading the search for Blackwater. That night, as the house settled into an uneasy vigilance, Katherine found herself unable to sleep. The thought of leaving Twin Falls, leaving Patrick just when they had begun to build something meaningful together, was unbearable. Yet the alternative was putting him and others at risk by remaining a target in their midst. A soft knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. "Katherine, are you awake?" Patrick's voice pitched low. She opened the door to find him standing there, still fully dressed, fatigue and concern etched on his features. "I couldn't sleep either," she admitted, stepping back to allow him into the room, propriety be damned under the circumstances. Patrick remained near the door, maintaining a respectful distance despite the privacy. "I keep thinking about what might happen tomorrow," he said quietly. "About you leaving and me not being able to protect you myself." "I'll be safe with the marshals," Katherine assured him, though her own heart ached at the impending separation. "I know, Wilson's men are good." Patrick ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "But it should be me." Katherine moved closer to him, close enough to see the stubble darkening his jaw, to catch the scent of coffee and gunmetal that clung to him. "You'll be doing the most important thing, finding Blackwater, so this can end and I can come home." "Home," he repeated, the words seeming to give him strength. "Yes, and I will find him, Katherine, I promise you that." Something in the intensity of his gaze, in the barely restrained emotion behind his words, broke the last of Katherine's hesitation. Moving with a courage born of the night's uncertainty, she closed the distance between them and placed her hands on his chest. "Patrick," she whispered, "I don't know what tomorrow will bring. But I know that you taught me to trust again, to believe that there are good men in this world who keep their promises and stand for what's right." His hands came up to cover hers, warm and strong. Katherine, she rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his, silencing whatever he had been about to say. For a heartbeat, he remained frozen in surprise, then his arms encircled her, drawing her closer as he returned the kiss with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. When they finally separated, Patrick rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. "I love you," he said simply. "I need you to know that before you go tomorrow. Whatever happens, whatever Blackwater does, that won't change." "I love you too," Katherine replied, the words feeling both momentous and completely natural. "And I will come back to you, Patrick Bentley. That's my promise to you." They remained that way for a long moment, savoring the connection between them, drawing strength for whatever trials the coming days might bring. Then, with a gentle kiss to her forehead, Patrick stepped back. "Try to get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow will be a long day." As he left, closing the door softly behind him, Katherine touched her fingers to her lips, still warm from his kiss. Despite the danger that lurked in the darkness beyond the marshal's house, despite the uncertainty of what lay ahead, she felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. Whatever happened next, she would face it with courage, not just for herself, but for the future she and Patrick might build together once Blackwater was finally brought to justice. Dawn broke with the sound of men readying horses and checking weapons. Katherine had packed her few belongings into a small carpet bag Martha had given her. Dressed in her green calico dress and a warm shawl against the early morning chill, she stood in the marshal's kitchen, saying her goodbyes to the Mackenzies. "You write to us as soon as you reach Helena," Martha instructed, embracing her tightly. "And don't you worry about a thing here. Your job at the store will be waiting whenever you return." Robert patted her shoulder awkwardly. "You showed real grit, Miss Rose. This town won't forget it." Marshal Jenkins shook her hand formally. "Safe travels, Miss Rose. Wilson's men will take good care of you." And then it was time to say goodbye to Patrick. He stood by the door, his face composed into the professional mask of the deputy, though his eyes told a different story as they met hers. "Your escort is ready," he said, his voice carefully neutral for the benefit of the others present. "Two of Wilson's best men. They'll see you safely to Helena." Katherine nodded, unable to trust her voice. The memory of last night's kiss burned between them, unspoken but powerful. Patrick picked up her carpet bag and escorted her outside where two stern-faced marshals waited with 3 horses. The morning was beautiful, the sky a clear, endless blue above the mountains, wildflowers dotting the grass with splashes of color. "I'll walk you to your horse," Patrick said, guiding her a few steps away from the others, seeking a moment of privacy. When they reached the small bay mare that had been saddled for her, Patrick set down the carpetbag and turned to face her. For a moment, he simply looked at her, as if committing every detail of her face to memory. "I meant what I said last night," he said finally, his voice low enough that only she could hear. All of it. Katherine felt tears threatening but forced them back. So did I, she whispered. Every word. He took her hand, pressing something small and cool into her palm. Take this with you, for luck and as a promise. Katherine looked down to find a small silver ring in her hand, simple but beautifully crafted with a delicate pattern etched around its circumference. Patrick, it was my mother's, he explained quickly. One of the few things I have left from her. I want you to hold it for me until you come back. His eyes held hers, intense and vulnerable. And when you do, if you still feel the same way, perhaps you'll consider wearing it properly. The implication of his words, a proposal, or at least the promise of one, stole Katherine's breath. She closed her fingers around the ring, holding it tight. I'll guard it with my life, she promised. And yes, Patrick Bentley, when I return, I would be honored to wear your mother's ring. A rare, full smile transformed his face, lighting his gray eyes. Before either could say more, one of the marshal escorts cleared his throat, indicating it was time to depart. With Patrick's help, Katherine mounted the mare, tucking the precious ring securely in her dress pocket. As the small party prepared to ride out, she looked down at Patrick one last time. Find him, she said simply. End this so I can come home. Patrick nodded, determination hardening his features. I will, you have my word. As Katherine rode away from Twin Falls, escorted by the two marshals, she didn't allow herself to look back. To do so would be to risk breaking down entirely, and she needed her strength for the journey ahead. Instead, she focused on the weight of Patrick's ring in her pocket, a tangible reminder of what and who she would be returning to. The journey to Helena was uneventful, for which Katherine was grateful. Her escorts, while not particularly talkative, were professional and courteous, ensuring her comfort during the two-day trip. They stayed overnight at a small way station before completing the journey to the territorial capital. Helena was larger and more cosmopolitan than Katherine had expected, with substantial brick buildings lining its main streets and an air of permanent prosperity derived from the gold strikes that had established the city. She was installed in a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Holloway, who had an arrangement with the federal marshals for housing protected witnesses. You'll be comfortable here, Miss Rose, Mrs. Holloway assured her, showing her to a clean, pleasant room overlooking a small garden. And safe. My late husband was a federal marshal himself. I understand the importance of discretion. Days passed, then a week, with no news from Twin Falls. Katherine tried to keep busy helping Mrs. Holloway with household tasks, reading books from her landlady's substantial library, and exploring Helena under the watchful eye of a marshal assigned to her protection. But always, her thoughts returned to Patrick and the danger he faced in hunting down Blackwater. At night, she would take out his mother's ring, studying its delicate workmanship by lamplight, imagining it on her finger. The simple piece of silver had become a talisman, a physical link to Patrick and the future they had begun to envision together. Finally, 10 days after her arrival in Helena, a telegram arrived. Blackwater apprehended. Stop all safe. Stop returning to Helena with prisoner tomorrow. Stop Patrick. Katherine read the brief message a dozen times, relief washing over her in waves. It was over. Blackwater was captured, and Patrick was safe and coming to Helena. The next 24 hours passed with excruciating slowness. Katherine changed her dress 3 times before settling on the green calico that Patrick had admired. Mrs. Holloway, sensing her agitation, kept her busy with baking and other household tasks, but nothing could fully distract Katherine from watching the clock. When a knock finally came at the boarding house door late the following afternoon, Katherine's heart leapt into her throat. Mrs. Holloway went to answer it while Katherine remained in the parlor, suddenly overcome with nerves. She heard the murmur of voices in the entryway, then footsteps approaching the parlor door. And then Patrick was there, filling the doorway with his presence, still in his travel clothes with dust from the road clinging to his boots. For a moment neither spoke, simply drinking in the sight of each other after days of separation and fear. Then Patrick smiled, that rare, transformative smile that reached his eyes and changed his entire face. "Katherine," he said, her name a benediction on his lips. She was across the room in an instant, propriety forgotten as she threw herself into his arms. He caught her easily, lifting her slightly off her feet as he held her close, his face buried in her hair. "You're safe," she whispered, tears of relief and joy spilling down her cheeks. "You found him." "I promised I would," Patrick replied, his voice rough with emotion. He set her gently back on her feet but kept his arms around her, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. Mrs. Holloway discreetly cleared her throat from the doorway. "I'll just go put on some coffee," she said, a knowing smile playing around her lips as she left them alone. Patrick drew back slightly, his eyes moving over Katherine's face as if memorizing every detail. "You look well," he said. "Helena seems to agree with you." "I've been counting the hours until I could leave," she admitted. "It's a fine city, but it's not home, and where is home?" Patrick asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Katherine reached into her pocket and withdrew the ring he had given her, holding it out in her palm. "Wherever you are," she said simply. Patrick's eyes darkened with emotion as he looked from the ring to her face. "You still feel the same then?" "More strongly, if anything," she replied. "These days apart have only confirmed what I already knew, that I love you, Patrick Bentley, and I want to build a life with you." With hands that trembled slightly, Patrick took the ring from her palm. "Katherine Rose," he said, his voice steady despite his obvious emotion, "would you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "With all my heart, yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if it had been made for her, Patrick's face reflected a joy so profound it nearly took Katherine's breath away. Then he was kissing her, a kiss that spoke of homecoming and new beginnings, of promises kept and a future filled with possibility. When they finally parted, Patrick kept her hand in his thumb brushing over the ring that now symbolized their commitment to each other. "There's something else I need to tell you," he said, "something that may affect our plans." Katherine looked up at him, suddenly anxious. "What is it?" "I've been offered a position," Patrick explained. "Marshal Wilson was impressed with how I handled the Blackwater case. He's recommended me for appointment as the federal marshal for a new district they're creating east of Twin Falls." "Patrick, that's wonderful," Katherine exclaimed. "You'd make an excellent marshal." "It would mean more responsibility," he cautioned. "Longer hours, more travel, and while the pay is better, it also means more risk." Katherine reached up to touch his face, tracing the scar along his jaw with gentle fingers. "I fell in love with a lawman," she said softly. "I know what that means and I accept it. Your sense of justice, your commitment to protecting others, these are part of who you are, part of why I love you." Relief washed over Patrick's features. "I was afraid you might want a more settled life, especially after everything you've been through." "What I want is a life with you," Katherine assured him. "Whatever that entails." The sound of Mrs. Holloway returning with the coffee tray prompted them to step slightly apart, though Patrick kept hold of Katherine's hand. "I hope that ring means what I think it does," Mrs. Holloway said with a smile as she set down the tray. "It does indeed," Patrick confirmed, his pride evident in his voice. "Miss Rose has agreed to become Mrs. Bentley. Wonderful news," the older woman exclaimed. "This calls for more than coffee, I think. I have a bottle of good sherry I've been saving for a special occasion." As Mrs. Holloway bustled off to fetch the sherry, Patrick led Katherine to the sofa. "There's more news from Twin Falls," he said. "Good news, I think?" "Tell me," Katherine encouraged. The town council met after Blackwater's capture. With him gone, there's been talk of expanding the school, making it a proper building instead of just the back room of the church. "They're looking for a teacher." Katherine's eyes widened. "A teacher? But I don't have any formal training. You have more education than most in Twin Falls," Patrick pointed out. "And the council was impressed by your testimony against Blackwater, said it showed character and intelligence." Robert Mackenzie put your name forward. Me, a teacher. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Katherine had mentioned her dream of teaching to Patrick during one of their evening conversations, but she had never imagined it might become reality so quickly. You don't have to decide now, Patrick assured her, but it's an option if you want it. The position would start in the fall after we're married if that timeline suits you. Married in the summer, Katherine mused, a smile spreading across her face. That sounds perfect, Mrs. Holloway returned with the sherry, and they toasted the engagement. As the afternoon turned to evening, they talked of plans a small wedding in Twin Falls with the Mackenzies standing up for them, a honeymoon trip to visit Patrick's remaining family in Wyoming, and their return to begin their new life together. What about Blackwater? Katherine asked as the evening wore on. What will happen to him now? Patrick's expression turned serious. He'll stand trial here in Helena, away from his sphere of influence. With all the evidence against him, including your testimony and your brother's, he'll likely spend the rest of his life in prison. And Thomas? Katherine had thought often of her brother during her time in Helena, wondering if he had made it to Denver, if he was keeping his promise to change. He testified at the preliminary hearing before leaving for Denver, Patrick told her. He seemed different, more like the brother you've described from before your parents died. He asked me to tell you he was sorry again and that he'd write when he was settled. Katherine nodded, a bittersweet feeling washing over her. Perhaps Thomas truly would make a new start, become the man he was meant to be before grief and weakness led him astray. She hoped so, for his sake more than her own. I've made my peace with the past, she said after a moment. Thomas, Blackwater, all of it. What matters now is the future, our future. Patrick's hand tightened around hers, his gray eyes warm with promise. Our future, he echoed. I like the sound of that. 3 months later, on a perfect June day with wildflowers blooming across the Montana landscape, Katherine Rose became Catherine Bentley in a simple ceremony at Twin Falls Small Church. Martha Mackenzie had sewn her a beautiful wedding dress of ivory silk, ordered specially from Helena. Robert Mackenzie stood up for Patrick, while Martha stood for Katherine. The entire town turned out for the celebration that followed, grateful to the couple who had helped free them from Blackwater's influence, and curious about the new federal marshal and his schoolteacher bride who would be such important figures in the community's future. As evening fell and lanterns were lit in the town square where tables had been set up for the wedding feast, Katherine found a moment alone with her new husband away from the well-wishers. Happy, Mrs. Bentley? Patrick asked, his arm around her waist as they stood at the edge of the celebration, watching their friends and neighbors dancing to the music of a fiddle and accordion. Happier than I ever imagined possible, Katherine replied, leaning into his embrace. If someone had told me 6 months ago that I would be standing here now as your wife, about to start a new life as a teacher, I would have thought them mad. Patrick chuckled, the sound vibrating through his chest against her cheek. Life has a way of surprising us. 6 months ago, I was a lonely deputy with nothing but my duty to look forward to. Now I have you, a new position, and more hope for the future than I've felt since I was a boy. Katherine turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to touch his beloved face. Do you remember what you said to me that first day, when you found me running from Blackwater's men? Patrick smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I believe I said, you're safe now, Miss Rose, I promise. And you kept that promise, Katherine said softly. You made me feel safe when I thought I would never feel secure again. You taught me to trust when betrayal had made me afraid to believe in anyone. You saved yourself, Katherine, Patrick corrected her gently. Your courage, your resilience, those were always within you. I just had the privilege of witnessing them. As the music shifted to a slower tune, Patrick took her hand. May I have this dance, Mrs. Bentley? You may indeed, Marshal Bentley, Katherine replied with a smile. As they joined the other dancers, moving together in perfect harmony as if they had been partners for years instead of months, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the terror of that day running across the Montana plains with Blackwater's men in pursuit, to the joy of this wedding day surrounded by friends who had become family, it had been a path of tremendous change and growth. The woman who had once been sold to pay her brother's gambling debts was gone, replaced by a stronger, wiser woman who had found not just safety, but love and purpose as well. And as Patrick held her close under the star-filled Montana sky, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that the best chapters of their story were still to come. 5 years later, Katherine sat on the porch of their ranch house east of Twin Falls, watching as Patrick taught their 3-year-old son James how to gently pet the new foal born just days before. Their daughter Elizabeth, not quite a year old, slept peacefully in Katherine's arms, her tiny hand curled around her mother's finger. The years had been good to them. Patrick's reputation as a fair but firm marshal had grown throughout the territory, earning him the respect of honest citizens and the wariness of those who operated outside the law. Katherine had flourished as Twin Falls schoolteacher, beloved by her students and credited with raising educational standards in the growing community. They had built their home on a small but prosperous ranch halfway between Twin Falls and the next settlement, east, a strategic location for Patrick's work, and a perfect compromise between town life and the open country they both loved. With the help of a young ranch hand, Patrick managed to keep a small herd of cattle and horses in addition to his martial duties. Life wasn't without its challenges. Patrick's work sometimes took him away for days or even weeks, leaving Katherine to manage both the ranch and her teaching responsibilities while caring for their children. There had been dangerous moments, too, an encounter with cattle rustlers that had left Patrick with a bullet graze along his ribs. A difficult birth when Elizabeth came early during a blizzard with the doctor unable to reach them. But through it all, they had faced each challenge together, their bond only strengthening with time and shared experience. As the sun began to set over the distant mountains, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, Patrick scooped up a giggling James and carried him toward the house. "I think someone's ready for supper," he called to Katherine, his face relaxed and happy in a way it rarely was during his early, more solitary days. "And a bath," Katherine added, noting the dirt streaking their son's face and clothes. "He takes after his father when it comes to finding mud puddles." Patrick laughed, setting James down to run the last few steps to the porch. "A grave accusation, Mrs. Bentley." "But not an inaccurate one, Marshal Bentley," she teased back. Later, after the children were bathed, fed, and tucked into bed, Katherine and Patrick sat together on the porch, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the evening sky. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting against him in the comfortable familiarity of long married love. "Letter came for you today," Patrick said, reaching into his pocket. "From Denver." Katherine took the envelope, recognizing her brother's handwriting. "Thomas has been good about writing regularly," she observed as she opened it. The letter contained the usual updates about Thomas's work with the railroad. He had been promoted to station manager the previous year, and news about the young woman he had been courting, now officially his fiancée. But there was something else as well, a bank draft for $100. "What's this?" Katherine murmured, showing it to Patrick. "Looks like he's paying you back," Patrick said, reading the accompanying note. "Says it's the first installment on the $800 Blackwater claimed he owed." Katherine's eyes filled with tears, not at the money itself, but at what it represented. Thomas had kept his promise made all those years ago in the Twin Falls jail. He had become a better man, one who honored his debts and took responsibility for his actions. "Are you all right?" Patrick asked, concerned at her emotion. Katherine nodded, wiping away a tear. "Just proud of him. He's come so far from the desperate man who once sold his sister to a gambling man." Patrick's arm tightened around her. "As have you from the frightened woman I found running across the plain that day. We've both come a long way," Katherine agreed, leaning up to kiss him softly. As they sat together in the gathering darkness, the sounds of the Montana night rising around them, coyotes calling in the distance, the gentle nickering of horses in the nearby corral, the creak of the porch swing beneath them, Katherine felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. Life had taken her on an unexpected journey, from terror and betrayal to love and family. And though the path had been difficult at times, she wouldn't change a single step that had led her here, to this porch, this home, this man who had taught her to trust again. In the nursery above them, James called out in his sleep, and Patrick rose to check on him. Katherine watched as her husband moved toward the door, his silhouette outlined against the warm light from within their home. "Patrick," she called softly. He turned, his face in shadow but his love for her evident in the very way he stood, waiting for her words. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." He didn't need to ask what she meant. After 5 years together, they could speak volumes in the spaces between words. With a smile that still made her heart skip a beat, Patrick nodded once before going inside to tend to their son. Katherine remained on the porch a moment longer, gazing up at the vast Montana sky now filled with stars. From a frightened woman sold to pay her brother's gambling debts to a respected teacher, beloved wife, and mother, it had been quite a transformation. But perhaps the greatest change had been within her heart, learning to trust again, to believe in the goodness of others, to open herself to love despite the risk of pain. And for that lesson, for the man who had taught it to her with his unwavering integrity and gentle patience, Katherine would be forever grateful. With a contented sigh, she rose and went inside to join her family, closing the door on the darkness outside and stepping into the light of the home they had built together, not just the physical structure of wood and stone, but the deeper home they had created in each other's hearts.